Welcome to New Wave Global. I'm Rabia Mahmood. Europe is a key destination for migrant workers or irregular migrants for not just from South Asia, but also Sub-Saharan Africa and even the Middle East. While we have seen documentation of the horrifying routes these irregular migrants take in hopes of achieving a better life in Europe, while some are fleeing persecution, economic instability, and other life altering problems, even war, if they manage to get to Europe, because when they are undertaking these journeys, these perilous, dangerous journeys, they often end up in tragedy. And when they do get to Europe, we see very little focus on what exactly happens to these migrant workers in these European countries. And by that, I mean how they are exploited. Yes, there are NGOs or academic researchers who are focusing on these issues, but like little of it is reported. And there's little attention paid to their lives and what exactly happens to them, because so many of them never really get any permanent statuses in these countries. Ottavia Spaggiari has uncovered exploitation of migrant workers in the winemaking industry. Very recently for Al Jazeera English, she has published an investigation. And this was in the winemaking industry of Italy. And it is a product which is often associated with luxury. So the focus of our investigation has been on the migrant workers from Africa, but there is definitely a Pakistani component and a South Asia component to the exploitation of migrant workers in Italy and also other countries in Europe. Ottavia is an adjunct faculty at Brooklyn College. She also teaches at an academic institute in Turin, Italy. She's a journalist and a media trainer. She's been published in The Guardian and the New York Times and the New Humanitarian and other publications. And of course, she used to previously report from Italy on this issue. So she's been widely published in Italy. Ottavia, thank you so much for joining us. So can you speak to us a bit about what you found and saw, and where in Italy was this exploitation taking place?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So the investigation that I focused on was in the winemaking industry. We know that a lot of migrants coming from both Sub-Saharan Africa, but also from Southeast Asia, as you pointed out, many don't have many avenues to get legal status, and so they remain in this kind of like limbo of being undocumented for years and years, and their only way to survive and to send money back home is to work without regular contracts. And a lot of organizations of companies take advantage of that. We know that a lot of migrants, undocumented migrants, have been exploited in the agricultural sector. But picking up tomatoes, for example, that has been one of the or strawberries. Those have been great examples, and a lot of reporting has been focused on those sectors. But what I found was even more interesting and more outrageous was the fact that many people are being exploited in the winemaking industry. And Italy has, it's one of the main exporters of wine in the world. And some of these wines are incredibly expensive. So a lot of migrants are being exploited for example, in the Langhe, which is an area of the Italian wine country where 1 hectare of land can cost up to 1.5 million euros, for example. And a bottle of Barolo, which is one of these wines that is produced in one of these areas, sells for 50 euro a bottle, but like the highest quality of this wine can range between 200 euros to over 1,000 euros. So it's not that just people being exploited in the agricultural sector, where products are very, very cheap, but it's also where products are incredibly expensive. And it's both migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa, but also migrants from Southeast Asia. What I found, for example, is that a lot of Pakistani migrants are getting exploited in Tuscany, where the Chianti wine is produced. Chianti is one of the most famous and most celebrated wines in Italy. It's a red wine, and it's kind of like a hidden exploitation. A lot of, for example, Tuscany is one of the main destinations in Italy for high, upper middle class or like rich, even international tourists from all over the world, especially the UK and the US. And it's really hard to see that like so many workers are working in horrible conditions, with very often no access to water and no access to food. They're being outrageously underpaid in the vineyards. And
they're
so,
also vulnerable to violence from from the people who have helped them get hired in these industries, and generally otherwise from other migrants as well. Can you also expand a bit on what's the role of the business owner? And because you have touched upon the intermediaries, the contract workers who are also migrants themselves, right? And and is this the same for South Asia, which is Pakistan, India, Afghanistan mostly, and Bangladesh, and also the sub-Saharan African countries that you have been focusing on for this one particular investigation?
Yeah, it's let's say that every area in Italy has their own kind of like dynamics. But what I found, for example, in Tuscany, where there's a high concentration of migrants from Pakistan, for example, is that you very often have wine companies that produce wine and produce Chianti wine, and they often rely on these intermediary companies that are very often run by other Pakistani migrants who have legal documents. It's very, very often Pakistani migrants who have been in the country for a very, very long time, and they hire new, let's say, like migrants who have recently arrived and who very often do not have legal status, and they provide labor force to the wine companies. In Italy, what's very interesting is the fact that we do have, like, this form of exploitation has an Italian name because it's so well structured. So it's called, there's a term that describes it, and it's called caporalato, which is a form of exploitation that relies on intermediaries to exploit newly arrived migrants very often. And we do have an anti-caporalato law, so an anti-exploitation law, but the problem is that the law hits on the gangmasters, so the intermediary companies, but it very, very often, like almost never ends up prosecuting the wine companies, or like the companies that rely on the like on these intermediary companies to provide labor. So that is a big shortcoming in the law.
So the big business never gets impacted. The big business
exactly, 100%.
Yes.
Yes. And what's interesting, let me add this, is that we've been talking a lot about, there's been a new, a very recent new migration deal in Europe, but through my and like immigration laws in Europe have become increasingly stricter over the years and over the decades. But through my reporting, I've interviewed many dozens of experts, legal experts, business owners, and migrants themselves, sociologists. And what I found is that big companies, medium to big companies, really have an interest in having so many people who are undocumented that can provide cheap labor. So that is also an economic interest that a lot of companies have.
That's just like fascinating because yes, visa regimes are like increasingly difficult. I mean, I'm in Pakistan, and the Italian embassy's Islamabad office has, from if you check their website and otherwise, other visa services is not processing visas for from a part of the country. I mean, there could be
Yeah.
other reasons for it. Yeah, but this of course speaks to the issue with the strictness of the visa regimes. And we do know that like a massive number of Pakistanis do undertake irregular routes, very dangerous routes, and by land and by water in order to get to the EU. And Italy is one of the main destinations as well. There's a big
Yeah.
Pakistani community over there, and
Yeah.
people lose their lives on these routes and are
Yeah.
subject to violence of all kinds by border authorities, even in
Yeah.
Turkey, in Greece, in Iran. So can you just tell us a bit about what do these migrants do? Because a poor migrant worker or an asylum seeker is not going to want to seek help for the exploitation he's subjected to, because that's the money that they're making and that's the only job they have. So there is an issue over there, right?
There's a huge issue. And, I can give you an example of Sajo. His name has been changed, but he was one of the main protagonists of my investigation. He's a migrant from the Gambia, from Sub-Saharan Africa. And after many years, he arrived in Italy, and he was able to get legal status in the international protection. And for a while, he worked, he had a regular job. He worked in a factory in northern Italy. But then what happened was that in 2018, the far right, one of the far right parties that were part of the government coalition at the time, eliminated the international protection, the international status that Shaja, this person, was under. And so he lost legal status overnight. He lost his house and he lost his job. And he had no other option than it was in the middle of the street at some point, and he was able, the only jobs that he could accept were irregular jobs, right? Where he was, of course, exploited. And that's how he entered the exploitation chain. He started to travel all over Italy, working in the fields, in the agricultural sector, picking up tomatoes, picking up olives at some point, doing the different kind of harvest campaigns around the country. And then he ended up in northern Italy, in the Italian wine country, and that's where he was exploited in picking up grapes for some of Italy's most expensive wines, and that's where I found him. So it's not just people who are desperate to find a job right after entering the country, but it's also people who used to have legal status and they lose legal status, and they have no other option but to really rely on these intermediaries. And as you said, if you're desperate to survive and you need to send your family money because that's why you left your home country, it's really hard for you to even file a complaint. The good thing about like a criminal complaint, against your exploiters. The good thing about the Italian legislation is that if you file a criminal complaint for exploitation, you are eligible for legal international protection. But even doing that, it has, its own risks. A lot of migrants who filed a criminal complaint against their exploiters ended up being threatened by their exploiters. Many were, very decided to actually withdraw their criminal complaints because of that, because there was so much pressure on them. And also, investigations take a long time. So it's really hard, for them to actually decide to come forward and report this crime.
So one more last question, quickly. What has been the impact so far? Have there been any arrests or any, progress made on cases? Quickly, if you can tell us about the impact.
Yeah, it was quite astonishing for me, because it's, when you publish an investigation like this, it usually takes a long time for readers and even, local authorities to act. But it was actually really quick this time. Of course, it's really hard to see whether there was a direct connection, but I can say that a few days after the piece was published, there was a police operation in this wine country that I reported on, and several intermediaries got arrested. Of course, wine companies haven't been investigated that I know of so far, so no result, like consequences for them. But there was, several people were arrested. And the investigation has been picked up by some of the main international media in the country, and also local media. And the national unions workers unions have talked about it. And one of the main associations of local wine producers has come out and basically signed an agreement with the local administrations, saying that they will improve their kind of like guidelines on how to monitor exploitation.
Okay. How to monitor exploitation, but nothing on the business and the human rights side of the industry. Because that's
what everybody has said. It's interesting because nobody came out and said this is not true. Everybody came out and said yes, this is happening and it's horrible. But still waiting to see what the actual consequences and what the improvements will be.
Okay, so there is some progress at least. Ottavia Spaggiari, thank you for speaking with us. We'll keep talking about the migrants issue from Pakistan perspective and South Asia perspective, as our viewers know. Thank you for watching New Wave. Khuda Hafiz.